This morning, I want us to think about what it means to have a reference point, to be reminded again and again. And this is probably not going to be anything new for us, but I think it's a place to kind of reset and reprioritize faith, is that you need a reference point that is outside of yourself. One of the lies of culture today is that if you just look inside deep enough, you'll find the answers. If you just do the hard work to get the self-awareness and the emotional intelligence and, to claim who you are and be your true self, you'll find what you need. When what you truly need is outside of you. You need a reference point that's external to who you are. If you were to go over to Scotland, a variety of different, castles and things that you would see, a lot of those castles have dungeons. And a dungeon, as you know, is just kind of a medieval jail, right? It's where you put somebody either to hold them to keep them from escaping, or you put them there in order to forget about them until they die. But one of them is called a bottle dungeon. And so St. Andrew's Castle, we probably know St. Andrew's most for the golf course that's over there, St. Andrew's in Scotland. But St. Andrew's Castle, there is a dungeon there, and it's of the type, there's a few of them that are like this. It's a bottle dungeon. Now, if you picture a bottle dungeon would begin with kind of a narrow neck at the top that is long enough that you couldn't climb up out of it, sometimes about 10 feet, slender enough that you can, a human being could go down inside of. Then after it goes down, you would think it kind of goes down big and nice and neat, and there's like a full apartment complex, but no, it's very small, about maybe 12 feet wide. But even some of these, the bottom comes to a point. So if you can picture a rounded, kind of a 12-foot rounded area with kind of a cone at the bottom, a prisoner would be lowered down in there. Now I want you to picture this for a second. All of the walls are round. There are no corners. The bottom isn't flat, so you can't lay down comfortably. It's incredibly dark. No hope for escape. What they found with bottle dungeons is that within a matter of weeks, people would go insane just because of not having anything fixed. Complete darkness, everything you touched was a round wall. You wouldn't necessarily know up from down or where things were, east from west, or to have any sense of reality. Some of you right now are getting a little bit nervous, okay, just relax. Most people, after just a few weeks, would, just lose their minds by being down there. But a story was told, and if any of you could track this down, send me the article, you'll get 15 St. John's points. I don't know what those points are redeemable for, but 15 points for anybody who can send me an article on this, because I tried to find out more about that this week. But there was a story of a person who was placed down inside of the bottle dungeon for, kind of his religious purposes and standing against, things that weren't very popular inside of his day. Lowered down into the bottle dungeon. He was down there for a month. And he still seemed to be alive, and he wasn't screaming, he wasn't, losing his mind. And it got their attention so much that they actually brought him back up. They lowered down the rope, and they brought him out, and they said, "How are you doing so well?" Now, we're in church, and so you would expect the answer to be, I'm trusting God, I'm rehearsing verses of Scripture. But what he said was much more practical than that. What he said was, when I lowered down, all I had were the clothes that were on me, but inside of my left pocket were 6 small rocks. Time out. I don't know why he has 6 small rocks. Was he expecting kind of a get David and Goliath moment? Was there something? Was that just what was left inside of his pocket? But 6 small rocks. And he said, whenever I would find myself getting anxious or out of control or ready just to lash out and scream, I'd reach into my pocket and I would count the rocks. I'd feel them in my hands. I would touch them and I would count the rocks. Sometimes I would actually pull them out and move them from one pocket to the next. And just by touching something that was fixed and defined and tangible, whenever I found myself about to lose it, I would count the rocks. Do you know of all the names we have for God inside of Scripture? He is love. He is our protector. He's our healer, and all these kind of, warm and fuzzy names. Especially when you read through the Old Testament, you get a handful of names that don't necessarily resonate with us in our 21st century reality, but were huge for ancient people. And that is, God is our rock, our refuge, our fortress, our anchor. And for a people who lived inside of a time where so much of life was uncertain, like being in a dark, hollowed out chamber where there were no sides or edges, or you couldn't even lay down flat, it is very reassuring to know that God is a rock, a refuge, a fortress, an anchor, an external reference point that even when everything else is moving, He's stable. When everything else shifts, He's secure. When everything else is fluctuating, He remains steady. I think for most of us, we've experienced tragedy inside of our lives, both personally and nationally or internationally. But for the most part, our lives are fairly predictable compared to other centuries and people who have lived. Most of us don't wonder where the next meal is going to come from. Most of us don't worry about when the next invading army might come into our country. Most of us don't have to go to bed at night worrying about our personal protection. But for people who lived inside of eras like that, it was comforting to know that God is a rock, a refuge, a fortress, an anchor. Because everything else is unsteady, and He's steady. Sometimes inside of our lives, when everything else is kind of floating and fluctuating and unstable and dark, sometimes you need to just count the rocks and know that there's an external reference point beyond yourself.